Friends, thank you for being here. What if I told you that the real crisis in America isn't happening in the headlines or on the debate stage? It's unfolding right there in the frozen food aisle at your local grocery store. What if I told you that the Great Depression never really ended? It just changed uniforms. You see, today's bread lines don't stretch around city blocks. They stretch quietly through Walmart, Costco, and Kroger, hidden in plain sight. But instead of tin cups and soup ladles, we now ration with debit cards and whispered decisions at the checkout counter. Do I need this? Can I afford that? This is not a temporary hiccup. This is a structural unraveling, a quiet collapse hiding behind official statistics and corporate marketing. The numbers say unemployment is low. The experts say inflation is easing. The stock market is up. And yet, for tens of millions of Americans, the weekly grocery run feels like a financial ambush. A gallon of milk pushing past $6, eggs past $5, chicken nearing $6.50 a pound. These aren't luxury goods. These are basic necessities. And still, for working-class families, they're slipping out of reach. And here's the truth. Nobody in power wants to say out loud, the system isn't broken. It's doing exactly what it was built to do. In a capitalist economy where profit takes precedence over people, food becomes a battleground. Not everyone will eat. And when scarcity meets inequality, you get hunger. Not as an accident, but as a byproduct of how this system works. Now, some will say, but look, the data shows growth. The economy's recovering. I say, growth for whom? Because when corporate profits hit record highs while families are forced to put groceries on a credit card, that's not recovery, that's extraction. It's economic cannibalism. We are not witnessing a temporary inflationary cycle. We are watching the return of something far more dangerous, the reawakening of a crisis that once brought this country to its knees, widespread poverty, hunger, despair. But with a modern twist, the new Great Depression won't come with a crash. It's already here, slow, silent, and suffocating. So here's the question we have to ask. If the price of survival is rising faster than our wages, what kind of society are we really living in? And more importantly, how long can it last? To understand how we got here, to this moment where families are rationing eggs and children are skipping meals, we have to go back, not just to 2019 or the pandemic, but to the very foundations of America's economic system, because this didn't begin with COVID, and it won't end with a Fed interest rate tweak. This crisis has been brewing for decades. Back in the 1930s, the Great Depression exposed the raw cruelty of capitalism unchecked. Banks failed, businesses collapsed, unemployment reached 25%, and millions were left to fend for themselves. But here's the key. That collapse wasn't an outlier. It was a symptom of an economy designed to boom for a few and bust for the many. And while the New Deal temporarily bandaged the wound, it never healed the root cause. Fast forward to the 1970s. Inflation was roaring, wages stagnated, and a historic shift occurred. The U.S. ruling class made a decision, not publicly, not democratically, but quietly in boardrooms and policy papers. They would no longer share the fruits of economic growth with workers. Instead, productivity would soar while wages flatlined. That gap between what we produce and what we're paid, it widened into a canyon, and the wealth flowed upward. Think about it. From 1945 to 1975, workers' wages and productivity moved together. But after that, productivity kept climbing while wages froze. CEOs and shareholders got rich. Workers got debt. This was not an accident. This was class war, waged from the top down. Now let's tie that history to the present. For the last 40 years, every major crisis, from the dot-com crash to the 2008 financial meltdown, has been met with the same playbook. Bail out the banks, cut public spending, and tell workers to tighten their belts. In other words, privatize the profits, socialize the losses. And then came the pandemic. In 2020, the economy was shut down almost overnight. Supply chains broke, millions lost jobs, and the government scrambled to respond. But who got rescued first? The big corporations, the stock market, Wall Street. Meanwhile, ordinary people were told to survive on one-time checks and expiring eviction bans. And once again, the crisis was used as cover to accelerate inequality. The richest Americans saw their wealth explode, while the working class fell deeper into debt. Grocery prices began creeping up, blamed on supply disruptions or labor shortages, but that was only part of the story. Here's something they don't like to talk about. After the initial pandemic shocks, many corporations realized they could raise prices and keep raising them without losing customers. Why? Because people have no choice. You can't skip food. You can't postpone hunger. That's not inflation. That's exploitation. If this sounds familiar, it should, because in the 1930s, the same dynamics were at play. Concentrated wealth at the top, mass suffering at the bottom, and a political class more concerned with Wall Street than working people. The breadlines back then were visible. Today's breadlines are digital, hidden behind grocery apps and food bank networks. But the desperation? That hasn't changed. And just like then, the media and political elites keep telling us it's temporary, it'll pass, just be patient. They said that in 1929, they said it in 2008, and they're saying it again now. But history has a warning. When capitalism pushes people to the edge, when millions can't afford to eat while corporations rake in billions, something breaks. In the 30s, it led to radical labor movements, sit-down strikes, and a wave of demands for economic justice. The question is, what will it lead to now? We're standing at a crossroads. The signs are all there. Runaway prices, stagnating wages, rising debt, and a government unwilling or unable to act. Sound familiar? It should. Because this isn't just a repeat of the Great Depression. It's a mutation, a 21st century version with apps, credit cards, and corporate spin. But the root cause remains the same, a capitalist system that serves profit, not people. And let's be clear, this is not a natural disaster. It's not a fluke. It's a consequence of decades of choices made to benefit the few at the expense of the many. And unless we confront that honestly and directly, no amount of short-term fixes will change the trajectory we're on. Because history doesn't just repeat itself, it escalates. And the economic storm we're facing today is not the end. It's the beginning of a larger reckoning. One we've seen before, one we're seeing again. We are told the economy is strong. We're told inflation is cooling, the job market is healthy, and consumers are spending. That's the official story. But step into any supermarket in America and tell me if that story holds up. Because what I see isn't strength, it's struggle. Quiet, daily, invisible struggle. The kind that doesn't show up in stock prices but lives in kitchen tables across this country. Let's start with something simple. Bread. The most basic staple of human life. In the year 1930, a loaf of bread cost 5 cents. Adjusted for inflation, that loaf should be around $1 today. Instead, the average price is $4.20. And it didn't creep up over decades. It nearly doubled in just the past 3 years. Now, ask yourself, did your paycheck double in that same time? I call this the new breadline. It doesn't form on sidewalks, but inside big box stores, at the register, in the cart. And it's not just bread. A gallon of milk now costs $6, up from $3.50 just a couple years ago. Eggs, they've jumped from $1.50 to over $4.60 a dozen. Chicken breast is flirting with $5.50 a pound. Ground beef has shattered the $7 mark in some states. And this isn't some luxury food conversation. This is the American dinner table we're talking about. Protein, milk, bread, these are the building blocks of family survival. And they're being priced out. When basic food becomes a luxury, the message is clear. The system is failing. Now, some try to explain it away. Oh, it's just supply chains. It's temporary. Things will normalize. But let me walk you through exactly why this isn't going away, and why it's not just food that's collapsing, but the entire illusion of American economic stability. First, inflation. Real inflation, not the kind they massage with statistics. The Bureau of Labor Statistics reported grocery prices rose 11.2% in 2024, on top of 13% the year before. Do the math. That's nearly 25% food inflation in just 2 years. Now compare that to wage growth, which barely moved at 4% annually. That's not just inflation, that's financial strangulation. For a household making $50,000 a year, that means they're seeing $2,000 in new income, but $5,000 in higher grocery costs. That's not catching up, that's sinking. And let's talk about how the government responded. In early 2025, the administration reintroduced sweeping tariffs, just like the Trump-era policies we've seen before. These tariffs targeted imports from China, Mexico, and Europe under the guise of protecting American jobs, but in reality, they function like hidden food taxes. Rice, mostly imported, spiked 20% overnight. Canned tuna, up 25%. Imported cheeses surged by 30%, and coffee beans, the lifeline of over 100 million Americans, jumped another 15%. That's not patriotism. That's policy punching working people in the stomach at the breakfast table. And it didn't stop there. The tariffs triggered retaliation. Mexico slapped duties on American corn and beef. China raised tariffs on U.S. wheat and soybeans. What happened? American farmers got squeezed, and consumers paid more. That's not winning a trade war. That's self-inflicted economic injury. Let's go deeper. Shipping costs, still inflated from the pandemic years, have remained stubbornly high. Diesel prices refuse to drop, and now it costs 30% more to move produce across the country than it did just 2 years ago. That extra cost, it's baked into every tomato, every apple, every gallon of milk. And no, corporations don't eat that cost. You do. And then there's climate. Yes, climate. The U.S. Department of Agriculture reported a 15% drop in corn yield in 2024 due to severe drought in the Midwest. At the same time, historic floods in California wiped out huge volumes of lettuce, strawberries, and other essential produce. Globally, wheat prices climbed 18% thanks to drought in Argentina and war in Ukraine. We're not just paying for scarcity, we're paying for a system that refuses to adapt to the climate crisis it helped cause. Now here's where it gets ugly. While you're making trade-offs in the grocery store, corporate America is posting record profits. Let me be absolutely clear. This is not a food shortage. It's a price manipulation bonanza. Kroger's 2024 earnings up 22%. Tyson Foods, they raised prices 14% and pocketed billions. This isn't inflation. It's what I call greedflation. The deliberate hiking of prices beyond cost increases simply because people have no choice but to pay. A study from the Harvard Business Review put it plainly. Companies aren't just passing on costs. They're using inflation as cover to gouge. It's price gouging, plain and simple, and it's happening because there's no serious regulation stopping them. Now multiply all of this: inflation, tariffs, climate, profiteering across every item in your grocery cart. A 5-pound bag of flour that cost $2 in 2023 now goes for $3.50. Frozen chicken packs jumped from $10 to $15. A bulk case of canned tomatoes, once $18, is now $25. It sounds like small changes, but across a month's worth of groceries, it adds up to hundreds of dollars in extra costs that don't come with extra income. And so what are families doing? They're putting it on credit. According to TransUnion, Americans charged $68 billion worth of groceries to credit cards in 2024. That's a historic high. And with average credit card interest rates now over 20%, that $200 grocery run balloons into $250 if not paid off quickly. It's like financing your meals with payday loans. Think about the madness. We now live in a country where people have to borrow money to eat. That is not a functioning economy. That is a warning flare from a collapsing one. And while all this is happening, the media headlines brag about GDP growth and a strong consumer sector. I ask again, growth for whom? When 50 million Americans are food insecure, meaning they don't know if they can afford their next meal, that's not a growing economy. That's an economy that's devouring its own people. A report from Feeding America in 2025 showed 1 in 4 U.S. households skipped meals weekly due to cost. In 2019, that number was 1 in 10. That's more than double in just 6 years. And for the most vulnerable, seniors, single parents, students, it's worse. Food banks are overwhelmed. In 2025, Feeding America distributed over 6 billion meals, and even that wasn't enough. Lines stretch around blocks. Cars wait for hours. Not just in inner cities, but in middle-class suburbs. The face of hunger has changed. It now wears polo shirts and drives a Toyota Corolla. And what happens to health when food gets replaced with cheap calories? Harvard's public health studies show 68% of lower-income households cut back on fresh fruits and vegetables in 2024. They're substituting with processed, packaged food, the kind that leads to obesity, diabetes, and heart disease. The long-term health cost of this crisis will be catastrophic. And don't overlook the mental toll. The American Psychological Association reported a 34% increase in anxiety and depression directly linked to food insecurity between 2022 and 2025. Because hunger isn't just physical, it's emotional. It's the shame of putting groceries back at the register. It's the quiet guilt of a parent eating less so their child can have more. This is the real crisis. Not in the headlines, but in households. Not in Wall Street earnings, but in empty refrigerators. And let me tell you, this is not an isolated moment. It's the logical outcome of decades of prioritizing profit over people, markets over meals, speculation over substance. And if we keep going down this path, if we keep letting corporations write the rules, letting policy serve investors over families, then yes, we are headed not just into a downturn, not just into recession, but into something that rhymes dangerously with the 1930s. The new Great Depression won't announce itself with a crash. It's already here, quiet, incremental, devastating. The question is, how long are we going to pretend this is normal? Let me be blunt. This crisis is not just about groceries. It's not just about inflation or tariffs or even food insecurity. Those are the symptoms. The disease, the root cause, is a system that puts profit before people. Always has, always will, unless we change it. Let's break it down clearly. Politics doesn't exist in a vacuum. Every economic decision, every market trend, every policy tweak, they're all shaped by the logic of capitalism, and that logic is simple. Maximize profit, minimize cost. That's it. That's the guiding principle. Now ask yourself, where do wages fit into that formula? Where does affordability fit? Where does the long-term health of society fit? Nowhere. Because under capitalism, your struggle is a feature, not a flaw. If your rent goes up, if your grocery bill explodes, if your wages lag behind, that's not a system failure. That's a business model, and it's not limited to food. Housing, skyrocketing, healthcare, still the number one cause of personal bankruptcy. Education, saddling young people with debt before they even enter the workforce. This is a multi-front assault on basic life necessities. But let's stay with food for a moment because it reveals the pattern so clearly. The price spikes we're seeing today didn't come out of nowhere. They're the product of decades of consolidation. In sector after sector, a handful of giant corporations have swallowed their competitors, taken over the supply chain, and squeezed both producers and consumers. 4 companies now control over 80% of the beef market. Similar monopolies exist in dairy, grains, and packaged foods. So when prices go up, it's not about supply and demand, it's about market power. And that power is used to extract as much as possible because there's nothing to stop them. And here's the kicker. Those same companies spend millions lobbying politicians to keep it that way. They fund campaigns, write regulations, and ensure that when crisis hits, the solution isn't real reform. It's more of the same. More tax breaks, more deregulation, more market-based solutions that always leave the working class holding the bag. Now think about the consequences. A system built on competition ends in monopoly. A system that claims to deliver freedom leaves people without choices. And a system that rewards exploitation eventually turns against its own foundation, the working class. But this isn't just a domestic issue. What we're seeing now is part of a global unraveling. Let's zoom out. In the international arena, American capitalism is losing its grip. For decades, the United States was the unquestioned economic superpower. Its currency the default, its corporations the model, its policies the standard. But that era is fading fast. The rise of BRICS, Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa, and now additional members like Saudi Arabia and Iran, has created an emerging alternative to US-led institutions. These countries are forming trade alliances that bypass the dollar, invest in local infrastructure, and build economic resilience on their own terms. They're tired of being subjected to IMF austerity, World Bank conditions, and US sanctions. And speaking of sanctions, the United States used them as a weapon of economic war for decades. But that weapon is losing its edge. Countries are adapting, they're forming regional coalitions, they're trading in yuan, in rupees, in gold, they're building new systems that don't require US permission. Why does this matter for food prices at home? Because as American influence weakens abroad, its ability to control global supply chains, stabilize currency flows, and access cheap imports begins to falter. The post-World War II economic order, where the US writes the rules and everyone else plays along, is breaking apart. And that has consequences. As tariffs rise, as trade alliances shift, as geopolitical tensions simmer, the costs filter down, straight to the checkout counter. You can't insulate yourself from the world when your entire economy depends on global production. Take coffee. Nearly all of it comes from abroad. When Brazil faces drought, or Colombia faces instability, or tariffs disrupt trade routes, Americans pay more. Same with wheat, soy, seafood, even fertilizer. You can't build an economy on global extraction and expect immunity when that system cracks. And then there's the climate. Extreme weather is no longer the exception, it's the rule. Drought in the Midwest, floods in California, heat waves in India, fires in Australia, crop failures are now baked into the global food system. And yet, corporate agriculture, driven by short-term profit, continues to strip the soil, overuse water, and destroy biodiversity. Why? Because addressing the climate crisis doesn't yield quarterly returns. Even when it comes to solutions, the system reveals its limits. Plant-based foods? Great idea. But almond milk now costs over $4.50 a carton, up from $3 just 2 years ago. Organic produce? More expensive than ever. Healthy, sustainable food becomes a luxury, while processed junk stays cheap. Why? Because there's more profit in illness than in wellness, more profit in crisis than in stability. And here's where I get to the heart of it. Capitalism is not just failing to solve these crises, it is reproducing them, it is feeding off them. Every disaster becomes an opportunity for those at the top. When climate destroys crops, prices go up and corporations profit. When inflation hits, executives raise prices even higher. When families can't afford groceries, they turn to credit. and the banks collect interest. This is not a malfunction. This is the logic of the system, playing out in real time. What we're living through is not a food crisis. It's a class crisis. It's a wealth transfer. From the poor to the rich, from the working class to Wall Street, from families trying to get by to corporations setting earnings records. And the worst part, most of the solutions we're offered are designed to preserve the system, not transform it. Temporary tax credits, one-time relief checks, charity drives, coupons, they treat the symptoms, not the disease. Because if we actually solved the root problem, and if we actually confronted the role of corporate greed, financialization, and capitalist logic, we'd have to rethink the entire structure. And that's exactly what they don't want. But let me tell you, if we don't confront it now, the consequences will only deepen. The debt bubble will grow. The food crisis will spread. Social cohesion will fray. Hunger is not just a health issue, it's a political accelerant, and history tells us what happens when a system squeezes too hard for too long. Just look at the labor strikes of the 1930s, the rent protests, the marches, the political realignments. People don't just suffer in silence forever. They organize, they push back, they demand change. And when a society reaches a tipping point, the outcomes become unpredictable, for better or worse. So here's the question. Are we going to keep patching the dam with duct tape, or are we going to rebuild the foundation? Because the choice is coming. In fact, it's already here. Either we restructure this economy to serve human needs over corporate profits, or we brace ourselves for a level of instability that makes 2020 look like a warm-up act. This is not alarmism. This is analysis. And if you're feeling the pressure in your wallet, in your home, in your community, you're not alone. You're not imagining it. You're living inside a collapsing model. And it's time we said it out loud. This crisis isn't confined to America's borders. What we're experiencing, this rising cost of living, the deepening inequality, the collapse of affordability, it's not just domestic decay. It's part of a broader global shift. And if we don't understand that shift, we'll be blindsided by what comes next. For nearly a century, the United States has positioned itself as the center of global capitalism, the financial hub, the political hegemon, the cultural exporter. But that position is eroding, and fast. We are entering a multipolar world, one where power is no longer concentrated in Washington and Wall Street, but diffused across emerging centers in Asia, Latin America, and beyond. Take China. Once dismissed as a manufacturing backwater, it's now the second largest economy in the world, and by some measures already the first. It leads in electric vehicles, solar production, 5G infrastructure, and artificial intelligence. And most importantly, it's doing what the U.S. hasn't done in decades, investing directly in its domestic productive capacity, in infrastructure, in the material needs of its people, not just the profits of its corporations. Meanwhile, the BRICS bloc expanded in 2024 to include countries like Saudi Arabia and Iran, is becoming a counterweight to U.S. dominance. These countries are building their own financial systems, sidestepping the dollar, forming trade partnerships independent of the West. For the first time in modern history, the U.S. dollar is being challenged not by force, but by function. Now, why does that matter for the price of groceries in Peoria or Buffalo or Tucson? Because the American economy has relied for decades on cheap global labor, cheap imports, and a strong dollar that let us buy more than we produce. But in a multipolar world, that model begins to crumble as nations pull away from the dollar. As global trust in U.S. economic stability fades, the cost of maintaining our lifestyle from fuel to food rises permanently. In the past, whenever the U.S. ran into economic trouble, it could paper over the cracks by printing money. The Federal Reserve would lower interest rates, flood the markets with liquidity, and push asset prices back up. But today, that playbook is backfiring because now when the U.S. prints money, it drives inflation. When the Fed raises interest rates to fight that inflation, it hurts working-class borrowers. It pushes housing out of reach, drives up credit card debt, and stifles wage growth. There's no good move left, just harder choices. And around the world, others are watching closely. They see a superpower with rising food insecurity, paralyzed politics, and declining global influence. And they are no longer looking to the United States as a model. In fact, many are seeing us as a warning, a lesson in what happens when an empire prioritizes profits over people for too long. Think about it symbolically. What does it say when America, the richest country on earth, has lines of cars wrapping around food banks while its billionaires shoot rockets into space? What does it say when we spend nearly $900 billion on the military but can't keep milk under $6 a gallon? It says something profound, that the empire is no longer serving its own citizens. And when an empire stops delivering for its own people, its legitimacy erodes, and not just abroad, but at home. And that's exactly what's happening. Public trust in institutions is plummeting. Congress has a lower approval rating than ever. Half the country believes the system is rigged, because it is. And this loss of faith isn't just political, it's economic, moral, even existential. Because once people realize that their suffering is not accidental but engineered, once they connect their empty fridge to the quarterly reports of Tyson Foods or the rising cost of eggs to Wall Street speculation, something shifts. That realization becomes power, it becomes anger, and eventually it becomes action. Across the globe, we're seeing that transformation. In France, mass protests over pension cuts. In the UK, strikes across industries. In Latin America, a wave of leftist governments re-emerging, not out of ideology, but out of necessity. And in the US, the seeds are being planted. Union drives at Amazon, organizing at Starbucks, mutual aid networks popping up in working-class neighborhoods. People are finding each other in the chaos and demanding something better. This global shift is not just political or economic, it's psychological. The illusion of stability, that things will go back to normal, is fading. People know in their bones that the old world isn't coming back, and the new one is being born, painfully, unevenly, but undeniably. So, where does that leave us? It leaves us at a precipice. The American dream, once exported as a model of success, now rings hollow in the very country that invented it. And as the world moves on, reorganizing its power structures and rewriting its rules, the U.S. faces a choice: double down on a failing system or finally confront the economic reality we've ignored for too long. We cannot afford to keep treating global capitalism as inevitable. It's not. It's a choice. And so is what comes next. So where are we really? We are in the middle of a slow-moving economic breakdown. Not a dip, not a hiccup, but a systemic unraveling. And it's not coming. It's already here. It's in the food banks that can't keep up. It's in the grocery carts half filled with desperation. This is not just inflation. It's not just bad policy. It's the cumulative result of an economic system that has been hollowing out the foundation of working-class life for decades, all while congratulating itself for record corporate profits and stock market highs. The pain at the register? That's the symptom. The disease is deeper. And if we don't confront it now, the consequences will be far more devastating than most are prepared to imagine. Let's call it what it is, the modern face of a depression. It doesn't look like black and white photographs of dust bowls and breadlines. It looks like overworked parents rationing dinners. It looks like growing kids going without protein. It looks like groceries on credit cards with 20% interest. It looks like quiet suffering in every zip code of this country, including the ones we used to call middle class. And as long as we pretend this is temporary, As long as we wait for the markets to fix what they help destroy, nothing will change. The hard truth is that no amount of consumer resilience can outpace corporate greed. No amount of optimism can fix a system designed to serve the few at the expense of the many. But here's what history teaches us, and this is important. Crises reveal the cracks in the system, yes, but they also open the door for something new. The original Great Depression gave rise to the labor movement, to social security, to a generation that demanded more, not because the system reformed itself out of kindness, but because ordinary people got organized, they got angry, they got clear about what needed to change. We are at that same fork in the road now, and the choice is clear. Either we continue down this path where food becomes a luxury, debt becomes permanent, and life for the majority becomes a daily economic war zone. Or we build something better, something that doesn't measure success in stock buybacks or GDP, but in whether people have enough to eat, a system where the question isn't how do we protect corporate profits, but how do we guarantee human dignity? Because in the end, this is not just about food, it's about who we are as a society. And the question we all need to answer before it's too late is simple. How much more are we willing to lose before we say, enough